Buenas tardes and good afternoon. My name is Tony Milne, and I'm delighted to introduce the next session on the ecosystem of smart spaces and smart cities. We are in Barcelona, a city renowned for its public spaces and for its support and use of smart city technologies. And we're also surrounded by the IoT ecosystem at our annual gathering. We have here suppliers of components, subsystems and systems, integrators and installers, operators and maintainers. The company I work for, Advantech, supplies components for edge computing and communications, and one of our customers is Hitachi, a company that is revolutionizing sales through IoT technology. So it is particularly relevant that to moderate this session, we have from Hitachi's Global Social Innovation business, its Chief Commercial Officer. She is a passionate believer in smart cities and has a long history in sales roles in IoT and digital companies, including GE, Ericsson, and QWest. Please join me in welcoming Beverly Ryder.
Thank you for the great introduction. I'm not going to be nervous at all because there's a very empty room today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. If I could have the panelists please come up with me, please. After we sit down, then we'll do introductions and get going. Thanks. I need a little bit of energy because it's been a long day. I don't know about all of you, but I've been here since 7:30. So.
And more people in the room, huh?
What? Yeah. If we were in a smaller room, it'd seem like a lot of people in this one. So the panel today is about smart cities, and we wanted to talk about this from a different perspective, more from an IoT ecosystem perspective, and looking at not just cities, but spaces. So what does it mean to be a smart city? What does it mean to have a smart city ecosystem? And then how do we develop that, and how do we look at smart cities overall? From my perspective, the reason that I'm here talking about smart cities is it is actually a passion of mine. While I've been at a lot of industrial IoT companies, I really feel that smart cities and smart spaces is the avenue to blend all of the different components of IoT. It allows you to get peoples, it allows you to get infrastructure. You heard I was with infrastructure companies, it has IT, it has OT, and it really blends all of the best of IoT together. So my background, just briefly, he said a little bit. I was with GE. I'm now with Hitachi. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for the Social Innovation business, which really means change agent, everything digital. Like most companies have some sort of digital implementer. And it's my honor today to introduce three people on the stage, which is kind of funny. When I first went back from owning a startup, I had a startup and I sold it. And after that, I went back into industry. And I happened to work with these three companies at that time on some very large projects. So it's with pleasure that I introduce all of them. We're going to start right here to my left with Vinay Dhar from...
Yep, thank you, Beverly. It's great to be here. My name is Vinay Dhar, and I'm a head of IoT for market area Europe and Latin America in Ericsson. I've been in IoT business over 6 years. And one reflection from the event, I've been attending the event whole day today, and a clear winner which comes out is sort of the importance that the industry is realizing around the need for ecosystem. I think this is a defining moment, I would say, for the IoT business, because this is what will take it to the next level. And as part of the ecosystem, Ericsson, with 100+ years driving the connectivity technology, we play a very important role in defining the connectivity technology, the network needed to really drive adoption of IoT at a large scale. And I'm very happy to be here, share some experiences, and of course, learn a lot from this discussion.
Thank you so much. Samir, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Happy to be here, folks. My name is Samir Sharma. I'm the Global General Manager for Smart Cities and Intelligent Transportation at Intel within our IoT group. What that means is my team works with end customers and partners across the globe, but also pulls together internally all the right pieces to make the smart city smart. It's already been referred to a couple of times. I think the world's going from pure hardware or pure software to an interplay of hardware and software. That's what IoT is. A lot of us who've been in the industry long enough, we used to call it embedded. It wasn't very sexy back then, I guess, is the right way to put it. But now, right now, there's a lot of interest in IoT because it's fundamentally changing how we live, how our cities improve the quality of life for our citizens. For us, the most significant part is that we are investing with our ecosystem. Intel will almost never sell anything directly to a city or a municipality or an airport. But the connectivity and the compute solutions that we have, including investments in things like artificial intelligence and computer vision, make it to the end customer through our partners, through our ecosystem. The other thing I would say is we have moved from a PC-centric company into what we're calling a data-centric company. In fact, last quarter, for the first time in our existence, our revenue from non-PC businesses, so that's data center, network infrastructure, and IoT, exceeded our revenue from the PC business. And that was a watershed moment, and this was a transformation about 5 years in making for those of us working on it internally. So we expect the PC business to keep growing, but we expect the rest of the businesses to grow faster than that. And this is also an opportunity to give a shout out to our partners who are enabling us to deliver all this wonderful technology in the end solutions.
Thank you very much. Chris.
Thank you, Beverly. Hello, everybody. Chris Bates here from Deloitte US. Very happy to be here and talk about what we're doing to help smart cities and smart spaces. I'm in a unique position in that I get to help governments catch up to where we are already. If you think about it, we all have smartphones. We all go home and you probably have Google Home or Alexa, and we're interacting with this technology and we're enjoying the benefits of that every day. Most of our governments are not. Cities, counties, states, government agencies are way behind. They're not able to take advantage of these technologies. We are helping get those governments to that spot where they can take advantage and gain some benefit for not only themselves, but for all of us who live and work within that space.
Well, that's awesome. So maybe I'll start with you for my first question,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Sure.
So what role does Deloitte play in smart cities and smart spaces?
Deloitte is working with these government agencies, government municipalities already. And we're not traditionally known as a technology company. We've been known for audit and tax type roles, but it turns out that our consulting work is much larger than those. And what do we do with consulting? Well, we're actually in there as their trusted advisor. So if you think about what does that government agency need to do to be successful, technology implementation is one of those. And now that we have advances in technology like IoT, as 5G is coming along, as AI continues to grow and machine learning, we need to help those government agencies think about how to properly apply those technologies to achieve their desired end states. Deloitte helps them work through that. It's not about the flashy, shiny new thing that's out there, but it's about enabling the government's mission through the use of technology. And Deloitte works as a partner with that government organization to help them find, well, first off, to understand the business problem they're trying to solve, and then to apply the right tech solution with an ecosystem of partners to make that tech solution possible so they can achieve their desired end results.
Well, that brings up probably 20 other questions, but we probably should move on to, I'm going to go to Vinay. I'm not going to go in order back and forth because every panel I've gone to, they've gone back and forth, so I'm going to mix it up a little bit.
No, I mean, I like to focus on two areas when it comes to basically the role that Ericsson plays defining the connectivity layer and connectivity near services layer within the IoT. I mean, we heard a speaker in the morning talk about 70% of IoT projects fail. And one of the reasons being that they don't move from, let's call it a small pilot phase into really driving the deployable scale. And one reason for that is, of course, the lack of definition and lack of standardization on the horizontal layer. I mean, we believe, of course, there will be verticalized use cases, but to really enable and drive verticalized use cases on a scale, on a global level, of course, requires a very robust horizontal layer. And connectivity technologies and connectivity near technologies plays a very important role. So we are really working with the industries, working with service providers, working with ecosystem players to really drive the standardization definition and basically, work similarly how we have worked in the mobile industry, with 7 billion more connections. And the reason that has happened on a global level is, of course, due to standardization. So we're working with device companies on chipset level, on device level, on module level, to define how a device should actually get automatically connected to a network when it is switched on. How do you really manage when billions of devices are connected, with a zero-touch, almost, close to zero-touch onboarding process and lifecycle management of devices? So it's an important area for us. We're investing, working with you all in the room and others outside the room to really define that standard. And the second thing then, of course, which is also very important, and some of the speakers talked about it before me, 5G.
5G.
Yeah. I mean, if I put it simply, 5G is not a replacement. 5G is an evolution. And I think the good thing about this evolution is that this evolution is coming together with how the use cases are also evolving, which is actually good, because at least in my 20 years of being in this industry, it has never been together. So I think this is a good news that you have a technology which will provide capabilities that are more, stronger, needed for more evolved use cases in IoT. And similarly, then there is also a maturity around the use case itself that are evolving. And I can take an example, for instance, of an automotive customer that we've been working closely for the last 5 years. And if you look at automotive industry 6 years back, I mean, it started with just a simple telematics connected solution, really to provide SOS information when you are in an emergency situation. Now to more evolved use cases where you can actually switch on and off a heater in Nordics, where I live, when it's minus 20 degrees temperature, 10 minutes before you drive a car. So it's more real time. To actually now Volvo in Nordics basically supporting more complex use cases such as broadcasting, or let's say transmitting the information of the slippery road on the cloud, and the cloud then transmitting and broadcasting it to all the cars that are traveling the same road and warning the driver to take care. So it's an evolution from a very simple use case to a little complex real-time use case, more processing needed, to use case that we're working with Volvo cars on self-driving, where of course you have communication, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to cloud, where gigabytes of data will be transmitted almost on an hourly basis. And then, of course, 5G will play a very important role in driving the evolution of such use cases. And it's across every other use case that they will evolve. And 5G will be important for that.
Absolutely. The other thing that I would add is we were talking as a panel earlier today that there's IoT and M2M solutions running on 2G, on 3G, on 4G, and will be on 5G as well. So it's not limited to the 5G evolution. It's happening today, which I think is super interesting. So Samir, I'd like you to answer the question that I asked you earlier about the organization, but could you also tell us after that about the evolution that you've seen in that smart spaces, smart cities business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to share a very personal story, when we first started having conversation with the cities, I believe we went in with an advantage because the CIOs, the CDOs in the city had been buying Intel-based technology for their IT applications for decades. So they knew who Intel was, but we were talking about now the sort of the co-merging of IT and OT into IoT, right, if I can call it that. And that conversation was a bit of a learning experience. Because we'd been talking technology to the CIOs for decades, we started with the same process. And we realized we lost their attention. Because people sitting on the other side of the table were interested not in technology and boxes and on a roadmap or chips. They were interested in understanding how can we help them solve the real problems they're facing. And frankly, if it's a mayor, he's sitting there thinking, how do I get reelected, right? Because I want to deliver value to my constituents.
Yes.
So we took that feedback to heart, and we went back and we said, we need to first understand this market. We need to scan globally, because we are a global company. It's a bit of a responsibility for us as well. what are the top pain points? What are the top use cases that we need to focus on? And we found really two big categories. There are use cases that are here and now and are a common theme. It doesn't matter whether you're talking to a city in the US, in EU, urbanization in China, you go to Singapore or India. Public safety, by far, is the #1 application, the #1 use case. The second big use case is mobility. Help my people get from point A to point B efficiently, whether it's public transit, private car, rideshare, whatever it is. And the third one is around sustainability. Can we make sure that people where they are living have access to clean air? More than 80% of the world's population doesn't have access to clean air. And if you think about how fundamental that is to your quality of life, that's very unacceptable. So that was one bucket of here and now. The second bucket that I think the cities were struggling with was, everybody's coming and selling me a one-off solution. How does it all come together? You know, when I built my highways, I built them for cars, for trucks, for pedestrians, for everybody else. How do I build these next generation digital highways, this digital infrastructure, so I'm onboarding everything and new use cases? How do I future-proof it? How do I visualize all this data? And I'm very happy to say that all three partners here on stage, on the panel, are also Intel partners. So we've got the Hitachi visualization solution that applies and does wonderful things in a smart city context. A lot of the Ericsson base stations are powered by Intel. Thank you. And Deloitte is a great partner. And the reason I'm making this point is it's about the ecosystem. It's about partnerships. This work is too important and too complex for any one or two or three companies to do together. And really, everybody has to bring forth whatever unique thing they have in terms of capabilities and put it all together. And that's when the real magic happens. To your question about how smart cities have evolved, I think they're evolving from these single point specific solutions to how does it all come together with a more macro, a more global view of the infrastructure, at the same time being hyper-focused on what are the unique needs of my city. And that conversation has gone through a few iterations, and we are starting to see early signs of cities finally getting it right.
Got it. Those are great insights. Thank you so much. So Chris, I think that your company as well as Hitachi kind of came to a realization that although it's smart cities, it's really about all smart campus, smart spaces. It's a much broader term. So where have you seen that evolution happen, and how did you bring the ecosystem into that?
Agreed. We've seen quite a bit of evolution on this. If we were to dial the clock back a few years, folks weren't even willing to take a risk on a pilot project. And now we're hearing a lot of pilot projects, like we heard earlier, stuck in pilot purgatory. So the evolution there is, I tried an experiment, it didn't work. Okay, so how do we get beyond that? How do we get to something that provides real value? And we're starting to see some use cases come forward that do that. And I think the use cases that have the best viability are those that are starting with their business need in mind. It's starting, like Simon Sinek says, start with the why, right? So it's not the flashy tech, again, that's really driving these to success. The tech is an enabler to achieve some sort of desired business end state, business need. So if you understand why you're doing the work, then you have a much higher likelihood of achieving that, rather than proving that a technology works, but in getting towards some desired end state. So I think the real evolution that we're seeing right now is that folks are shifting that mindset to, hey, don't show me your cool tech, show me what we can do with it. Show me why it's important to me, whether it's re-election or it's reducing traffic congestion. In fact, we have one use case where a county in the US had excessive traffic congestion troubles. So I said, all right, we need to solve the traffic congestion by boosting ridership on public transportation. So here's the why. Then they said, how? Well, let's attract more people to ride public transportation. How do we do that? Well, IoT can help solve that. And that's what we did. We brought connectivity onto buses. So now people are able to be connected while they're commuting. They even had USB plugs so they could charge. So here's connectivity on a bus powered by IoT to solve traffic congestion problems. That's the thinking that we need to get to. Not how do we apply IoT, but what are we solving and what technology is out there to be able to solve it. And that bus example is great when you talk about ecosystem players, because Deloitte, I used to say we don't bend metal. Well, bending metal is probably a pretty old term now that you get to additive manufacturing, right? So yes, we do print things at Deloitte, but we're not printing chipsets. We work with our ecosystem partners to bring the right chipset to bear. So our role in this is to help our government clients figure out what's the right technology to apply and how do we apply it? How do we integrate them together into that ecosystem that will ultimately achieve that desired end result?
Thank you. You remind me of back, I would say in the early days, which is only 4 years ago, when ecosystem was just becoming a common term and people were just thinking about how do I offer an end-to-end ecosystem, an end-to-end solution to my customer in IoT, because I can't do it from one start to finish by myself. And at that time in the US DOT released this challenge and 65 cities competed for it, and it generated this ecosystem discussion and people at large companies first coming out with their alliance partners, and that had never been heard of before. So I know everybody on stage was alliance partners, including Hitachi, so I can talk about it. I worked at Ericsson at that time, but I know that everybody here was part of that first ecosystem discussion, so it's super exciting. So do you want to talk about from an Ericsson perspective?
No, I mean, I think I agree with Samir and Chris. I mean, it's important to really start with the why. That's really, going to the needs, especially in the city situation, understanding what needs the citizens have and what needs the society has. But I think one important other question that the city has to ask is what question? What role a city wants to take in this digital transformation? Because that's more often missed. And it does, of course, define a moment of how the city will be able to work in an ecosystem, because having an ecosystem is great, but then of course it brings the responsibility on how you work within the ecosystem. And it's important to really ask that question and say, what is my role in the ecosystem? And we've seen in Ericsson, for instance, I mean, working in Netherlands and in US, in Dallas City, I mean, there's a clear what role that the city has taken, and not really gone into be an end-to-end sort of vertical responsibility in a particular specific use case, but rather taking a more broader role on building a digital infrastructure and a digital enabler, and in that sense, driving more an enablement role. In Netherlands, we're working with the city where they take a very clear role to really own the infrastructure, collect the data, especially in this situation from transport infrastructure, and multiple ecosystem players working in this engagement, and then city taking a role to really present that data to different stakeholders, drive local innovation, drive applications that can result in building benefit to the citizens. So that's a very important question. How, why, how, and what role will I take as a city?
So I'm going to throw a question at you guys that I actually didn't tell you I was going to talk about, but it just popped into my head. We have to do one that's not on the list. So what do you think about the public-private partnership as part of the ecosystem? And anybody can answer, it doesn't.
So I'll share my viewpoints because we just came, about 3 weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C. at the Smart Cities Week and was speaking about one of the big gaps, which is funding. How do we fund a lot of these things that we want to go do together? And I was very pleasantly happy to see 2 categories of partners in the alliance. You talked about the alliances that I had never seen before. The first one was private equity firms, who are basically saying, look, I know how to convert a CapEx into an OpEx model for physical infrastructure. I believe there is an opportunity here in digital infrastructure to do something similar. We don't know quite how, but I can smell the opportunity, and I'm willing to start funding some of these early programs. The second category was large financial institutions, who again were looking at this as a fundamental market opportunity, but they're also looking at this from a social responsibility perspective. Increasingly, citizens are demanding that issues like traffic congestion, lack of public safety, transit issues, lack of parking, they're demanding that these things need to be solved. And so these companies, which by the way they have employees living in those cities, they are located in those cities, they want to contribute to making things better. So both of these angles came up again and again, and I would say the PPP discussion was probably, of all the complex things we discussed, it was one clear theme that came up. And the welcome change was we were not just discussing it, we were getting into how do we do it, and who's going to fund what, and what are the complexities. So we actually had the County of Fairfax in Virginia come in and share their experience of the detailed PPP proposal they put in place. I believe it was like a 45-line item proposal of what services, who's investing what, and how does it get funded to essentially build out the infrastructure. So to your question, PPP, I think you're going to hear more and more about it, because I think finally, there's a bit of a, I guess people are jaded talking about it. Everybody wants to go do something about it, and getting it funded is a big part of it.
So Chris, I know you wanted to answer as well.
Yes, thank you for that. In exact agreement with you on this is that government agencies typically don't have it in their budget to be able to solve these problems. And if they haven't thought out far enough in advance and put in a program of record and budgeted for this years out, they don't have the ability to run this on their own. So they have to seek out ecosystem partners that are potentially in the private world that can have some benefit in it for them. So if you think about a government agency that is going to collect some set of data, if they could turn around and monetize that data, whether it's some sort of subscription service, or there's an understanding in the very beginning that the investors in the infrastructure would have some stake in that data on the backside of it, then they're willing to help fund these projects. So one of the roles that we play is getting creative with the government organizations that don't think this way, helping them realize it's not just a standard budgeting process that could take many years, that there are, let's call it, more creative funding options that are out there. And in fact, Deloitte put out a paper from our DU press that's exactly how do you fund IoT, financing and funding IoT projects. So if you go to our website, you can find about 15 pages on how to get that done.
Well, thank you. So about 2 weeks ago, I was in San Diego doing a presentation like this, and we talked to a city, the city of Edmonton, and specifically they had 42 stakeholders, public and private, that they were working at in their Smart City initiative in order to look at healthcare. And it was all the people that never had sat down at the table before. So their ecosystem, just to look at their healthcare issues, was 42 stakeholders that had to say yes in order to move forward with the solution. And that's before you have anybody that's sitting here on the stage. Right? We didn't get to blockchain, we didn't get to AI, we didn't get to technology. It was just to solve the social problem and to move forward. So as I say that, I'm going to ask you, because there's monetary issues that we haven't talked about, and then there's specific use cases. It used to be when we talked about smart cities, we were talking about smart city. Now we're talking about smart spaces, we're talking about energy, we're talking about transportation. We're talking, even in some cases, manufacturing as it relates to smart spaces. So how do you view, first of all, what is a smart city now and the bleed over? And then secondly, what use cases have you seen that relate to that?
Sorry,
Go ahead,
I'm happy to jump in there. From my perspective, it's really, where do you work and play? Right? If you think about that, we work and play in spaces, and we have certain expectations about what we would get from those. Everybody here, I'd venture to guess, has a smartphone on them right now. And just that revolution of being able to have instant access, the now generation, instant access to anything that we need right in the palm of our hand, and then to go into work and have that taken away, that happens. It happens to our government clients all the time. And if we can help bring that technology to bear in those spaces so they can be as productive at work as they are at home, then now we're making a smart space. And for me, that's the bleed over there, is that we have an expectation of access to information and access to being able to get our work done, whether it's at home or in the workplace. So Deloitte approaches it from that point of view, and we help our government clients develop smart spaces so their employees can get their work done.
And Vinay, I think you wanted to say something as well?
No, I mean, a use case that's very close to me. I mean, a little bit more extended beyond smart city is, of course, a customer that we're working with, large shipping company. a logistics use case, which actually started with a very simple requirement on actually managing the color of banana to a specific color when transporting from point A to point B. Very simple requirement from the end customer. And we worked together to create a GSM network that works offshore in oceans and sea, and with that sort of build the ability for the shipping company to monitor the refurbished containers to maintain the temperature of the container so that the color of the banana is a specific color when it reaches point B. But what was great learning from this experience is that it always starts with a small requirement, a very clear requirement from the end customer,
Right.
and then it goes into really an evolution phase with the understanding of data that you start to collect from your connected products. And in this case, we evolved into really creating applications that really drove the cost of the fuel, which is an important component in the shipping industry, substantially by just empowering the captain on the ship to really address the speed within certain range so that you get the best fuel efficiency from that, and then also managing to reach the dock at an optimal time so that you don't pay more money for docking your ship at the docking station. So I mean, that's how it starts. You know, you need to have a very clear customer need addressed, and then within the ecosystem to really work as you start to collect data, to evolve more use cases, build applications, and create more benefits for the end customer.
And Vinay, what have you been seeing in this space?
So I'll try and complement what my fellow panelists have already described very well. We like what I call micro-cities, like airports and large campuses and theme parks, because the decision-making around implementing something is much simpler compared to a large city. You have a lesser number of stakeholders, the decision-making criteria is a bit more clear, and the implementation is a bit more controlled. So from a go-to-market perspective, it's a faster way to go implement some of these technologies. The other question you asked was around use cases. And I don't think we can separate out any conversation around use cases without talking about capabilities. Mm-hmm. So one of the most frequent use cases we are seeing in a city is giving infrastructure visual capabilities, giving your infrastructure eyes and brains. And that's one of the reasons we are investing so heavily in things like computer vision, AI on the edge. Because when you put up a camera, it's great you're putting it for public safety or to give people tickets to jump red light. But why aren't you using that camera to reduce traffic congestion, to find people parking, even to detect use cases like garbage overflow? This camera is already out there. You've already invested in that capability. Use video analytics, use over-the-air updates, and new algorithms to get more done with the same infrastructure. Why would you want to build an extra highway? Why wouldn't you invest in digital infrastructure to optimize traffic flow so your traffic flows more smoothly? Your ultimate goal as a city manager is not to build a new lane in a highway. It's to get people from point A to point B and find the most efficient way to get to that result. A perfect example I can share with you is one of the largest property developers in the Middle East met with us and said, look, I'm building a new mall, and I'm going to spend about $500 million building a parking structure next to it. But in 5 years, is 50 to 80% of the are those going to be autonomous? So it doesn't matter. You don't need to park. The car will stop in front of the mall. You get off, and the car goes and parks itself. And I said, I can't tell you what the future looks like, but what I can tell you is if you have dollars to commit to physical versus digital infrastructure, over-index on the digital infrastructure for two simple reasons. First of all, your physical infrastructure will stay the same. A parking spot will be parking spot 5 years later. But if you have video analytics and you have better AI algorithms and you have over-the-air updates, your digital infrastructure will increase the efficiency of your basic physical infrastructure. And by the way, you may have some dollars left over, so you can make some decisions later on, whereas once you pour the concrete on physical infrastructure, there's no going back. So that's how we are thinking about this from a capabilities perspective, and that's how we are investing with our partners.
So you're really thinking about it from a future-proofing perspective now.
Correct.
Right, because technology and change is happening so quickly.
Correct. Perfect example is your phone. I mean, nobody could have imagined 10 years ago that a smartphone with 3 basic apps will evolve into millions of apps and billions of users. You got to think about data at the city level in a similar manner.
So we have 11 minutes left, and I need to give people a chance to ask questions. I'm supposed to tell you that there are microphones for anybody who hasn't been in this room before, over here and over here. If you have a question, start thinking about it. I'm going to give you my last question, which is about monetization. So one of the things that we hear all the time and questions that I've been asked all day, yesterday and today, is how do you actually monetize IoT if you're not a manufacturer, you're not a transportation company, you don't have a large fleet? How does a city or a space actually monetize or prove the value of IoT? So why don't we start right here?
I mean, I think it's a good question to conclude the discussion here, because if there's one challenge in the ecosystem, especially in the smart city type of use cases, it is actually monetization. And we talked about funding options, private-public partnership models. But I mean, we need to understand that in an ecosystem, the value that each player brings is the sum total of that value is, of course, hopefully the value that you want to produce, offer to the end user. And then, of course, I mean, these situations, involve multiple, multi-dimensional business models, revenue flows going in multiple directions, and I think this is really one question that needs to be addressed. That how do you really drive monetization in an ecosystem, based on value drivers that each ecosystem partner brings.
Right.
If there's one thing that I would expect to happen now over the next 1 year is, again, on this stage, we have many more examples of real addressing this problem. I think this is a challenge that we all have to collectively address.
So Samir, thinking about it from an ecosystem perspective, how do you monetize? How do you have a revenue flow there's value in that ecosystem for everybody?
Yeah, when I think about monetization, I think we got to think about the source of that value and how that value gets distributed, right? I mean, those are the two things. And the source of the value from a city perspective is either showing to them that this can help reduce their total cost of operations. So they can do more with what they have or more efficiently to utilize the funding they have, or a new business model and new services that they can monetize. So that's one category. The other, I would say, monetization, I mean, we think in terms of dollars, but there is a social aspect of monetization as well, which is implicit value. The quality of life, the reputation of a city as a growing, thriving city, which in turn brings more people, more workers, more companies, makes it a more competitive city. That's the second part of the monetization. In fact, in the US, one of the struggles some of the top 30 cities are having is they're declining. People are leaving. And you cannot have a thriving city when the fundamental building block of a city, the citizens, are leaving. So cities like Baltimore, Kansas, Detroit are three great examples where the city leaders have said, we're going to invest in smart city infrastructure because it's a question of fundamental survival of the city. The second piece to that is coming back to the explicit monetization model. I think there's a lot more new business models that will evolve around how value is created. And I think the CapEx to OpEx conversion will be at the heart of a lot of those models. When we sit with partners, we have a very frank conversation, which is, look, we can either make this a distribute the pie conversation, which is if you get more, I get less, or we can make this an expand the pie conversation where all of us get to grow and unlock hidden value that doesn't exist today. And usually we focus on the latter kind of conversation, and it has led to some great business models, which I can't get into for NDA reasons on the stage. But we are already experimenting with those business models.
I think that's a great straight man into what Chris is probably going to say.
Yes, and thanks for that, Samir. And I couldn't have paid you better for that. Now, the data is the key piece here that I think you mentioned, and that it's the owner of the data. The value is truly in the data. Data is like gold. And these municipalities, these agencies, I saw an article today that even if you shut down location tracking, you're still being tracked, right? So the data that's being collected right now is the key, and who owns that data, who has access to it. We're seeing some cities that just expose it and say, hey, look, we're collecting all of this data. I want somebody to come in and build an app that then provides value to an end user. Where does the monetization come? It's subscription service in that app, right? So it's the exposing the data. Now, does the city then partner or team with the app builder to get some monetary benefit out of that? Probably, right? There's a way to do it. But they're initially exposing the data and saying, look, it's here, what could you do with it? So I would say we all need to be cognizant of that digital footprint, what we're creating, and then it's the true creators of the data that are somewhat in the driver's seat to be able to say, who am I working with and what value is my data going to provide?
Great answers, everybody. Thank you so much. I think we're going to move to questions, and we have one already.
Hi, interesting talk. We heard examples like the bus that's IoT powered and the IoT powered traffic congestion relief. What specific IoT project would each of you like to see in the city that you live in if you could only choose one?
I mean, close to my heart is, of course, environment. I belong to a city in India, Delhi, which is, of course, facing a lot of big challenges around environment. And there's a lot that can be done in terms of IoT to really help drive the sustainability on that city. The city is growing very fast. And what can the city government do collectively and use technology to really drive and help and bring climate benefits to the citizen, I think is at least very close to my heart.
So I'm from San Francisco Bay Area, and I think 9 out of 10 people in the Bay Area will tell you, get the traffic congestion under control. So that's a given. I mean, that's number one use case. But I would also say lack of affordable housing is another one, because you can't build a city without making it affordable for people of every income levels. It's just not fundamentally sustainable. And I think we are on a tough path if we don't get control of that.
I live in the Washington, D.C. area, similar with the traffic congestion, but we have options. I'd say probably even greater options than the Bay Area for commuting. So you look at city bus, you look at metro, you look at Uber, taxi, and your own personal car. I want to know the fastest way to get there. And it's not just plug into Waze or go to Google Maps. I need something more convenient to tell me, hey, you have a meeting 20 minutes across town. This is the right way to do it. This will get you there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? You have a question?
We've got one more.
Hey, Justin.
Hi, how are you? So fantastic panel, thank you very much. I have a kind of a two-part question here. So one is, these are big companies on the stage today talking about this ecosystem and how it works. How do startups play into this, and how can startups engage with these big companies to help be a part of creating those smart cities and activating some of the innovation economies in these cities? And then the second part of that question, which is maybe related, is what are some of the biggest challenges of building this ecosystem, this complex ecosystem to create these smart cities? Obviously, there's a lot of benefits, but what's hard about it, and how do we solve those challenges?
Do you guys mind if I start? I'll go really fast.
Go ahead.
Okay. So from my perspective, it's two. One is that we're always looking at startups, super interested in who's going to be disruptive, who has the next best idea. I don't care if you're 13 or you're 81, everybody is coming up with new and interesting and ways to turn industry or to change current philosophy. And then from a, what's the big challenge? Absolutely the contracting. So when you have 20 or 30 different organizations all working together to get T's and C's that people agree to it's a challenge at its best day.
So to add on to that, Beverly, I'd say that in working with governments, especially if you're working with the U.S. government, the biggest challenge we're seeing with SmartUps is being able to work through the U.S. government process. And there are things called FedRAMP. If you're not familiar with that, it can be daunting for a small organization, especially a startup. That's where an organization like mine can help you through that process and advise you whether it's even worth your time and effort, because it costs to make that happen. Personally, I'm here looking for startups with that disruptive tech that can help government agencies in the smart spaces realm and the connected fleet realm. So if you can help fleets of vehicles, because government agencies have those, or if you can help smart spaces where we work and play, Deloitte is looking for startups and any organization that has capability in that area.
So in our case at Intel, companies approach us all the time, and certainly through our Intel Capital Venture arm, which is one of the largest VC funds out there. Almost on a weekly basis, I'll talk to new startups, and my advice to them is very simple. Relative to the opportunity, think about your strengths and your weaknesses. Your strengths are the innovative spirit, the entrepreneurship, and the agility you have at looking at the same problem and coming up with new solutions. Your weaknesses, this is about infrastructure. And cities are now going to bet on a startup that may or may not survive, or may be part of another big company with a totally different strategy in a year or two. So make sure you're focused on something where you can innovate and add value, but it is not a place where if you don't survive, the entire city comes down to its knees. That just won't work. So when startups come and say, I want to build the next generation smart city platform, I very politely tell them, you may want to relook at your SWOT analysis about this opportunity and where you fit in. The second thing I would say is, I think what you just pointed out, the biggest threat to a startup survival is cash flow. And so contracts and the complexity in negotiation ultimately push out your cash flow. So figure out, by looking at your cash flow analysis, what is the bare minimum you need. Maybe it's a diversification of who you work with. Maybe you don't need to work with the largest city. Go and work with a theme park or a sports stadium, which is a more contained opportunity and faster time to revenue to keep going and pay your guys.
That's great advice, actually.
I
And we
mean,
have 40 seconds, so
I give
talk fast.
40 seconds answer to this. Of course, like others, I mean, Ericsson does, of course, work with startup community. We have a innovation process called I5, which basically is a process of incubating and working with startups around different areas and use cases. And if there's one challenge that we see is of course, the challenge for a startup company to scale, because they are so focused on driving innovation and user need. And they really look at us as Ericsson and other large companies to really build a horizontal infrastructure that is easy to scale globally. I mean, they get completely, it's difficult for them to really customize that being in a startup phase. So that would be one big challenge that we need to address.
So basically, everybody on the stage is going to fight for you if you're a startup and you have a great idea. I think that was a great way to end. Thank you all so much. You're a great audience. We appreciate you at the very end of the day coming to see us. So,
Thank you.
for you.
And thank you, Bev.
Thank you, Bev. Yes.